They found the letters buried beneath the floorboards of a forgotten farmhouse, yellowed paper tied with a ribbon the color of rust. Each one was dated 1943, written in a soldier's hand that trembled between love and fear. And as the first letter was unfolded, a story long asleep in dust began to breathe again. The War Letters, 1940s. Chapter 1. The First Letter from a Burning World. The farmhouse stood on the edge of Kansas prairie, where winds still carried the scent of wheat and rain even after 70 years. Emily Carter brushed the dust off her knees as she lifted a loose floorboard in her grandparents' living room. She hadn't expected to find anything except mouse droppings and splinters. Instead, she found a small tin box, dented at the corners, bound shut with string. Inside, tied with a faded red ribbon, were 17 letters. The first envelope trembled in her hands. Fort Benning, Georgia, September 5, 1943. The ink was still clear, the script firm and graceful. It began, "Dearest Anna, by the time you read this, I'll be somewhere over the Atlantic. The papers won't say where we're going, but the boys talk about France, about things we've only seen in the newsreels. I carry your photograph in my breast pocket, the one where your hair is caught by the wind. They told us to keep our heads high, but all I can think about is home and the smell of rain on the wheat fields." Emily's throat tightened. She had never heard of any Anna in her family, yet the farmhouse she was standing in had been her grandmother's, the same woman who used to stare at the horizon for hours every evening, long after her husband had died. As she read on, the words grew more alive. The mud, the noise of engines, the metallic taste of fear. But between the lines, there was something else, a tenderness that made the war feel almost human. "If I don't make it back, tell our son, when he's old enough, that his father wasn't brave, just lucky to have loved his mother this much." Emily stopped reading. Her grandparents never had a son, just her mother Margaret, born in 1944. The old grandfather clock ticked behind her. Wind whistled through the broken window pane. For the first time, Emily realized how little she actually knew about the people's photographs that hung on the walls, smiling in black and white, but always silent. She picked up another letter, this one marked with a smudged army seal. "Somewhere in Normandy, June 15th, 1944. The soldier wrote about landing on a beach that smelled of oil and smoke, about how his best friend, Charlie, never made it past the first dune, about praying in a foxhole while artillery tore the sky apart. I keep your last letter in my helmet. The ink ran from the rain, but your words didn't fade. When this is over, I'll build us a porch where we can watch the storms roll in, the way we used to dream." Emily wiped her eyes before the tears could drop on the page. She looked around the farmhouse, at the sagging porch, the worn swing still hanging by one chain. It was as if the dream had been built after all, just never shared. Her phone buzzed, her mother calling. Emily hesitated before answering. "Mom, did Grandma ever mention someone named Anna?" A pause. Then her mother's voice came, uneasy. "Why do you ask?" "I found letters, old war letters. They're signed by someone named Henry." "Henry Carter? My father's name was William." The silence that followed was thick, like dust disturbed after decades. Her mother finally said, "Pack those letters and bring them here. I think I think there's something you should know. Outside, thunder rolled over the Kansas plains. Emily placed the letters back into the tin box, but she couldn't resist keeping one, the first one, in her hand. The ink seemed alive, as if Henry's voice had crossed time to speak again. Every night, I close my eyes and see your face, Anna. The world is burning, but your smile keeps me from turning to ash. Emily whispered the words aloud, her voice trembling. She didn't yet understand that these letters would change everything she thought she knew about her family, that they were more than just memories. They were a map to the truth buried under 70 years of silence. Outside, the wind rose, bending the wheat fields like waves. Chapter 2: Shadows of the Past. The rain followed Emily all the way to Topeka. It came down in soft sheets against the windshield, smearing the glow of passing headlights. The tin box sat on the passenger seat beside her, wrapped in an old towel, as if it were something fragile, something alive. Her mother, Margaret, lived alone now, a quiet widow in her late 70s. When Emily arrived, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books. Margaret was sitting by the window, knitting a blanket the color of autumn leaves. Emily placed the tin box on the coffee table. "I found this under Grandma's floorboards," she said softly. Margaret looked at it for a long time before reaching out. Her fingers shook slightly as she untied the string and opened the lid. When she saw the letters, her face went pale. "Where exactly did you find these?" "In Grandma's old farmhouse, under the living room floor. There's a name, Henry, and they're written to someone named Anna." Margaret didn't answer right away. She lifted one letter, ran her fingers over the yellowed paper, as though she were touching a ghost. "Your grandmother's name wasn't always Margaret," she said finally, her voice almost breaking. "When she was young, she was Anna May Turner." Emily blinked. "So, Grandma was Anna? Then who was Henry?" Margaret's eyes glistened in the dim light. "Henry Carter was your real grandfather, my father." Emily sat down, her mind spinning. "But Grandpa William..." "William married your grandmother in 1946, after the war." The clock ticked somewhere in the hallway. Rain whispered against the window. Margaret sighed, folded her hands over her knees, and stared at the letters as though deciding whether to open a wound that had healed wrong. "You deserve to know," she said at last. "Henry and your grandmother grew up in a small Kansas town. They were high school sweethearts. He enlisted in 1942, right after Pearl Harbor. She begged him not to go, but he said he couldn't stay when others were fighting. They were engaged by mail. He sent her a ring carved from a shell he found on the beach in Georgia. She wore it till the day she died." Margaret paused, her voice trembling. "I was born in March 1944. Henry never saw me." Emily's heart twisted. "He didn't come back?" Her mother shook her head. "His unit went missing near the Siegfried Line in Germany. No body, no telegram, nothing but silence. Grandma waited for him for years. Then, in 46, a man named William came into her life, a war mechanic who'd lost his wife in an air raid. They helped each other heal, I guess. He adopted me, gave me his name, but I always knew she never stopped loving Henry." Margaret opened one of the letters and read aloud, her voice cracking. "Sometimes I dream about the wheat fields, Anna, about you standing there, waving your handkerchief while the train pulls away. That's the image I carry into every fight. If I don't make it home,
promise me you'll keep looking at the horizon. It's where I'll be." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. She must have hidden these when she remarried. She never spoke of him again, not even once. Emily sat in silence, feeling the weight of generations pressing down. The war had ended, but for her grandmother, it had never truly stopped. She reached into the box again and pulled out a letter sealed with a different kind of paper, thinner, foreign. It bore the mark of the U.S. Army Graves Registration Service, dated June 12, 1946. Dear Mrs. Anna Carter, we regret to inform you that the remains of Sergeant Henry Carter were recently recovered near the Rhine River, identified by personal effects. He is to be interred with full honors at Lorraine American Cemetery, France. Margaret covered her mouth, stifling a sob. She must have received this after she'd already married William, Emily whispered. She buried him under the floor so no one would find out. The storm outside grew heavier. Thunder rolled across the plains. Margaret took Emily's hand. I think she wanted someone to remember him someday, someone who could finally tell his story. Emily nodded, unable to speak. The letters suddenly felt sacred, not just paper, but proof of a love that war tried to erase. That night, long after her mother had gone to bed, Emily sat by the kitchen window, reading until her eyes burned. Henry's words came alive in her mind, the smell of gunpowder, the ache of distance, the unshaken hope. When I come home, Anna, I'll build us a porch facing west. We'll watch the sun fall behind the fields, and we'll never say goodbye again. The next morning, as dawn light touched the horizon, Emily made a decision. She would go to France, to the Lorraine American Cemetery. She would find Henry's grave and bring his story home. The world outside was quiet, the storm having passed, but inside Emily's heart, something had awakened, a mission born from a box of letters and the echo of a promise written 80 years ago.
Chapter 3. Across the Sea of Silence. The airplane window reflected Emily's face against the clouds, pale, sleepless, determined. The letters were tucked carefully into her bag, each one now sealed in plastic to keep the fragile paper from crumbling. Below her, the Atlantic stretched endlessly, gray and restless, the same ocean Henry had crossed in 1943. She had never been to Europe before. France had always existed in postcards and history books, in her grandmother's faded memories. Now it was a promise she meant to keep, a promise made before she was even born. At the Lorraine American Cemetery, rows upon rows of white crosses stretched toward the horizon, perfect and silent. The wind carried the faint smell of grass and rain. A caretaker led her through the pathways, his voice low with respect. "Sergeant Henry Carter, you said?" "Yes, U.S. Army, 1945. He served in the 84th Infantry Division." The man checked a list on his clipboard and nodded. "Plot E, row 12, grave 41. When they reached it, Emily froze. The cross stood simple and unadorned, carved with his name and number, and the words, "Beloved Son of Kansas." She knelt, pressing her palm to the cool marble. For a long time she couldn't speak. "I'm your granddaughter," she whispered finally. "They never forgot you, even when they couldn't say your name." She opened her bag and unfolded one of his letters, the last one before he disappeared. December 22nd, 1944, somewhere near Bastogne.
Anna, it's snowing again. We've been marching for days, and my boots have holes the size of dimes. The Germans are pushing harder than anyone expected. Some of the boys say it's hopeless, but I keep thinking of home. I dream of you sitting by the fire, knitting that green scarf you promised me. If the worst happens, know this: I'm not afraid. Love has already made me braver than I ever was. Her voice caught on the last words. Snowflakes drifted down, light, slow, almost weightless. For a second, she imagined Henry's hand guiding the pen, his breath misting in the cold, writing by candlelight while shells thundered in the distance. Emily noticed a small museum nearby and went inside. The curator, an elderly Frenchman named Luc, greeted her kindly. When she explained her purpose, his eyes lit up. Ah, Carter. Yes, the 84th Division. They were heroes here. Many never came home. He led her to a dusty binder filled with reports and photos. Among them was a faded photograph, a group of soldiers huddled around a truck, mud up to their knees, grinning despite the cold. Someone had scrawled names on the back in pencil. Henry Carter was one of them. Luke turned the page. This was taken near the Siegfried Line, February 1945. 2 days later, that position was shelled. Only 3 men survived. Emily's stomach knotted. Was Henry one of them? Luke adjusted his glasses. For a time, yes, he was reported missing on February 25th. But look here. He handed her a typed field report. It mentioned a Sergeant Carter who had been seen pulling wounded soldiers from a burning truck before disappearing into the smoke. His body wasn't recovered until 1946.
Emily stared at the page, the words blurring. "He saved them," she whispered. Luke nodded. Many of these men owed their lives to someone they never got to thank. Later, she walked alone through the cemetery again. The evening light turned the marble crosses gold. The air smelled of rain and earth. She thought of her grandmother, waiting by the porch, watching trains roll by, never knowing how her love had died or how bravely he had lived. She took out a small jar of Kansas soil she'd brought from the farmhouse and sprinkled it at the base of Henry's grave. "You're home now," she whispered. Then she did something she hadn't planned. She pulled a fresh notebook from her bag and began to write, not as herself, but as Anna. "My darling Henry, they told me you were gone, but I never stopped hearing your voice. The fields still hum with your laughter. I read your words to our daughter until she fell asleep, though she never knew the name of the man who wrote them. I'm sorry I hid you away. I just couldn't dare to lose you twice." Tears blurred the ink, but she kept writing. Each sentence felt like a bridge between the living and the dead, a way to finish a love story the war had interrupted. As twilight deepened, the wind carried church bells from a distant village. Emily closed the notebook and pressed it against the headstone. "Your words will finally be heard," she said softly. When she looked up, the cemetery shimmered in the fading light. Thousands of names, thousands of stories sleeping beneath the earth. Yet one of them, at least, was awake again. That night, back in her hotel room, Emily spread all of Henry's letters across the bed. They no longer felt like relics. They were voices, alive, yearning, unfinished. And she realized that maybe her purpose wasn't just to discover her family's secret. It was to share it. She opened her laptop and typed the title at the top of a blank page: The War Letters.
Outside, the wind rustled through the French trees like the whisper of old pages turning. Chapter 4. Telling a Silent Story. Emily returned to Kansas with a suitcase heavier than when she had left. Not from clothes or souvenirs, but from the weight of history she now carried. Henry's letters had transformed from fragile relics to a mission, a story demanding to be told. Every time she glanced at the tin box beside her, she felt the pulse of lives interrupted, love, courage, and the heartbreak of decades gone by. Her mother, Margaret, met her at the airport, eyes wide when she saw Emily with the letters. "You actually went to his grave?" Emily nodded. "I had to, Mom. I had to see him. And I think it's time someone knew the story. The world deserves to know about him, about their love." Margaret studied her daughter, her face lined with memories and caution. "Your grandmother hid this for a reason, Emily. It was too painful, too complicated. She loved Henry, yes, but life moved forward. Sometimes it's better to let some stories sleep." Emily's throat tightened. She understood her mother's caution, but she felt Henry and Anna's voices pressing against time, insisting on being heard. "I know," she said softly, "but sleeping history doesn't teach anyone anything. If we don't tell the truth, they disappear again. I can't let that happen." Margaret paused, then nodded slowly. "Then you'll need help. I'll tell you what I know, but the rest, it's up to you to find." Over the following weeks, Emily immersed herself in research. She sifted through military records, local newspapers from the 1940s, and even contacted surviving members of Henry's division. Every story she discovered added color and texture to the letters she held. Night patrols in Bastogne, freezing mud, the cries of soldiers pulled from burning trucks. And always the letters were there, Henry's calm, human voice threading courage and love into every sentence. Her apartment became a shrine of memory. Yellowed envelopes, photographs, typed military reports, and maps covered every surface. Henry's words were no longer just messages. They were beacons of hope in a world torn apart. One afternoon, Dr. Robert Sinclair called after reading her notes. "Emily, your letters are extraordinary. They're not just personal history, they're cultural history. People need to read them. They show courage, devotion, and the cost of silence." Emily felt a thrill of affirmation. "That's exactly it. I want people to feel it, not just read it." Together, they began crafting a manuscript. Emily wove Henry's letters into a narrative that blended history and memory, interspersed with reconstructed perspectives of Anna, drawn from Margaret's recollections. She painted Kansas wheat fields, lonely train tracks, and the farmhouse porch where Anna waited, imagining Henry returning every day. But the process was emotionally grueling. Each letter brought tears. Each historical fact renewed the ache of loss. Henry had died before ever knowing his child, and Emily bore the weight of that grief as she typed, letter by letter, story by story. Resistance came too. Emily shared her draft with her mother and distant cousins. Some hesitated, uncomfortable with family secrets being exposed. "Why dig up pain that's better left buried?" one cousin asked. Emily chose her words carefully. "Because the pain isn't just theirs anymore. It belongs to all of us. It's proof of bravery and love that transcended war. If we keep it hidden, we lose more than history. We lose the lesson it carries." Finally, Margaret said, I see now. This is bigger than our fear. Just promise me you'll do it with care, with respect for everyone involved." Emily nodded. "I promise." By late spring, the manuscript was complete. The War Letters was no longer merely a collection of envelopes. It was a narrative of hope, a bridge across generations, showing the power of love and courage in the darkest of times. She sent it to publishers, accompanied by a carefully written introduction. These letters survived by accident, buried beneath a farmhouse floor for decades, sleeping in silence. I share them now to awaken a story that never truly ended, a story of love, devotion, and bravery that transcended war itself. When the first acceptance arrived, Emily wept quietly. She thought of Henry, Anna, and countless unseen heroes whose lives had been swallowed by time. Now, finally, someone would hear them. In the weeks that followed, Emily gave readings in schools, veteran halls, and local bookstores. Audiences reacted with awe, with tears, inspired by the humanity captured in Henry's words. People wrote back to her, sharing their own family stories, hidden histories, proving that sleeping history wasn't gone. It was waiting to teach. One afternoon, Margaret visited Emily during a reading in downtown Topeka. The room was silent after Emily read a passage from Henry's letters, the audience lost in reflection. Margaret held her daughter's hand and whispered, "Your grandmother would be proud. She wanted him remembered, and now he is." Emily looked at the letters laid out before her, fragile, worn, alive. She understood something profound. The past, no matter how long buried, could still inspire the present. For every story left sleeping, someone could awaken it. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, Emily returned home with the letters. Outside, the wheat fields swayed in the gentle wind, golden in the evening light. Henry and Anna's love had survived decades of silence. And now, finally, it had a voice.
Chapter 5. Echoes Across Time. Spring had faded into early summer, and Emily felt the weight of Henry's letters as both a blessing and a burden. Every morning she sat by the kitchen table, the envelopes spread like a battlefield map, tracing the movements of a man she never knew, yet felt she had always loved. She decided to seek out those who had served alongside him, hoping to learn more about the man behind the words. With Dr. Sinclair's help, Emily tracked down 2 surviving veterans from the 84th Infantry. Both were in their late 90s, fragile but sharp-eyed, carrying the kind of quiet strength forged in trenches and foxholes. The first, a man named Walter Jennings, greeted Emily with a soft chuckle. "You're Henry's granddaughter, huh?" he said, his voice gravelly but warm. "We all thought the kid had the sun in his pocket. He had a way of making you believe in something bigger than fear, even in the middle of a mess like Bastogne." Emily listened, captivated. Walter recounted the freezing nights, the endless artillery, the hopeless stretches of mud and blood. And then he spoke of Henry, how he pulled wounded men from the wreckage of a burning truck, how he never hesitated to cover a comrade during a patrol, how he carried a photograph of Anna close to his heart. "Most of us didn't even have time to write home," Walter said, shaking his head. "But Henry, he wrote every chance he got, kept everyone's spirits alive with those letters, made the impossible feel bearable." The second veteran, Charles Monroe, leaned on his cane, eyes watery as he recalled the night Henry went missing. "He stayed behind to help the wounded. I begged him to come with me, but he wouldn't leave anyone. That's who he was, stubborn as hell and brave as the angels." Emily's hands shook as she clutched the letters in her bag. These were not just words on paper. They were the essence of a man whose courage outlived him. She realized that Henry's love for Anna, his devotion to her memory, had guided his every action. Even in his absence, he had shaped the lives of those around him. Returning home, Emily began organizing the letters for public reading and publication.
She wanted to recreate the sense of intimacy Henry had written into every line. She envisioned exhibits, readings at schools and libraries, and even collaborations with local theaters to stage the letters as monologues. Margaret watched her daughter with quiet awe. "You're giving him a voice," she said softly. "And in doing so, you're letting Grandma speak again too." Emily nodded, feeling the full weight of that truth. Anna had loved and lost, had buried her pain beneath decades of normal life, yet her story had endured through Henry's words. By bringing them into the light, Emily was reconnecting the past to the present, making sure it would not vanish. One evening, she sat on the porch of her grandparents' old farmhouse, letters in hand, watching the sunset over the wheat fields. The wind carried a familiar scent of rain and earth, and she imagined Henry standing across the fields, pen in hand, writing to the woman who would wait for him through all uncertainty. "Anna, even if the world burns around us, your love is my refuge. Keep looking at the horizon. I'll meet you there someday." Emily whispered the words aloud, letting the air carry them. The horizon stretched endlessly, golden in the late light, as if confirming his promise. She realized that telling the story was more than honoring the past. It was about inspiring the present. Courage, love, hope, these were not abstract ideals. They were lived experiences, tangible and enduring. The next morning, Emily received a letter in the mail. It was from a woman in Boston who had attended one of her readings. "Thank you for sharing Henry and Anna's story. My father was a World War II veteran, and I never knew how much his letters meant to him. Reading yours has given me a way to connect with him, to see the humanity behind the uniform. History isn't just dates and battles. It's people like Henry and Anna." Tears ran down Emily's cheeks as she read it aloud to Margaret. "This is why we had to do it," she said softly. "People need to see that bravery and love exist even in the darkest times. They need to know that stories like Henry's matter." Margaret placed her hand over Emily's. "You've done something remarkable, Emily. You've awakened sleeping history and given it life again. Grandma would be proud." Emily smiled, thinking of Anna and Henry, their love enduring across decades of silence and war. The letters were no longer trapped in a forgotten tin box. They had become a bridge, connecting families, inspiring strangers, and preserving the legacy of those who fought and loved when the world seemed too cruel to hope. That night, she placed the letters carefully back in their tin box and locked them in a drawer, not to hide them, but to preserve them for the next person who might need to feel the courage and love that Henry had carried through battle. Outside, the wheat fields swayed under a silver moon, whispering like an echo of the past. Somewhere in the vast expanse of history, Henry's voice spoke again, carried across time, carried into hearts willing to listen. And Emily knew that his story, Anna's story, would never sleep again.
Chapter 6. The Last Letter. Emily woke early the next morning, the soft golden light of dawn spilling across her apartment. She carried the tin box of letters to the kitchen table, as if preparing for a sacred ritual. Today, she thought, she would finish the story, not just for Henry, not just for Anna, but for herself. Among the letters, one remained unopened, tucked at the very bottom of the box. Its envelope was fragile, almost translucent, the ink faint but legible. No date was written, and Emily felt a shiver as she slid the letter free, the paper crinkling softly in her hands. She unfolded it slowly. "My dearest Anna, if you are reading this, it means I did not return.
I want you to know that every moment of this war, every act of fear or courage was fueled by the thought of you. Our love was my shield, my light, my reason. I hope that one day you can forgive me for leaving you behind, and I hope that our story, though it may seem lost, will live on. Always yours, Henry. Emily's breath caught. She pressed her hand to her chest as if to steady the beating of her heart. This was it, the letter her grandmother had hidden for decades. It wasn't just a message, it was the culmination of a love story suspended in time, finally reaching across the years to touch someone who could bear witness. Her mind wandered to Anna, her grandmother, young and radiant in the black and white photographs, standing on the porch of the farmhouse. She imagined Anna receiving this last letter, feeling the sharp ache of hope and despair intertwined, and burying it beneath the floorboards as if keeping Henry close while letting the world forget. Tears fell freely down her cheeks. She realized the weight her grandmother had carried, a lifetime of quiet mourning, a life lived in parallel to the love she had lost. And yet there was something extraordinary in that endurance, a testament to the human heart's capacity to survive, to nurture hope even in absence. Emily picked up her notebook and began to write, not as a historian, not as a granddaughter, but as a witness to love's resilience. Henry and Anna's story was meant to be silent, hidden beneath floorboards and decades of ordinary life. But love like theirs does not vanish. It waits, patient, until someone brave enough arrives to hear it. And now, finally, it will be heard. She paused and looked out the window. The wheat fields stretched endlessly, rustling in the morning breeze. She imagined Henry and Anna standing somewhere in that golden expanse, watching each other across time, their spirits meeting in the horizon where hope never fades. That afternoon, Emily returned to her mother's house to show her the final letter. Margaret took it gently in her hands, tracing the familiar handwriting, tears brimming in her eyes. She always waited for him, Margaret whispered. Even when life moved forward, she never stopped. And now, you've given her story a voice. Emily nodded. It's not just hers anymore, it's ours. Everyone who reads these letters will carry a piece of their courage and love. That's what matters. Margaret smiled faintly, a mix of pride and sorrow in her gaze. Your grandmother would be proud of you. You've honored her in a way no one else could. That evening, Emily held a reading at the local library. She read Henry's letters aloud, the words trembling but resolute, painting vivid scenes of distant battlefields, frozen nights, and enduring love. The audience listened in silent reverence, young and old, veterans and civilians, feeling the echoes of war and the human spirit intertwined. When she finished, the room remained quiet for a moment. Then applause erupted, soft at first, then swelling with emotion. People approached her afterward, sharing stories of their own grandparents, their own lost loves, their own battles, and how Henry and Anna's letters had inspired them to remember, to reconnect, to speak. Emily walked home under the evening sky, the air cool and fragrant with summer rain. The wheat fields shimmered in the distance, golden and alive. For the first time she felt the past and present converge. Henry and Anna's love, her grandmother's endurance, and her own determination to tell the story. She returned home and placed the letters back in their tin box, locking it carefully. This time, it wasn't to hide them. It was to preserve them, to protect the delicate proof of courage, devotion, and hope. And somewhere in that act, Emily felt a quiet peace. Henry and Anna's story had survived the war, the silence, and the passage of time, and now, through her, it would endure forever, a testament to the enduring power of love, memory, and human resilience. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly beneath a sky brushed with twilight. Emily knew that though the letters had been asleep for decades, they were now awake, ready to guide hearts willing to listen. The horizon glowed faintly in gold, carrying the promise of stories that could never truly be lost.